All right. What's going on, everybody? Welcome to Gators Online Live. I'm Keith Niebuhr of Gators Online, and on three, joined by Florida Gators beat reporter, longtime beat reporter, a decade now, Nick Delatorre, always talking about how old I am, but the guy's been covering the Gators since Steve Spurrier's freshman year, I think. We're going to break down last night's 49-7 Florida win over McNeese. We're going to also look ahead to next week's monster game, as it always is, against a ranked Tennessee team at the Swamp. And in between, we hope to have a guest. Florida defensive back commit Teddy Foster has said he's going to jump in the show for a few minutes, take some questions, talk about what it was like having Florida secondary coach Corey Raymond did his game the other night. So it should be a good show. But, Nick, let's get back to last night's game. I mean, we talked about it after the game, but now – you and I both had some time, and the fans too, to sort of digest what we saw. Seems like a feel-good win. What do you think?
Yeah, I think maybe more than anything, it's a palate cleanser. I don't know how much you can hang your hat on anything you do against McNeese, but to me, more than anything, and I've seen some videos from inside Florida's locker room, just to get that good feeling again and being able to celebrate, calling the locker room club dub. You get to be around your teammates and celebrate a win. Florida hadn't had that since they beat South Carolina on that field last season. So I think you build some confidence, just getting the feeling of a win. Like, so much goes into practice and lifting, and you sacrifice so much, and you hadn't gotten the fruits of that labor in a while. So I think that's good for Florida. If I'm Florida, I like that you use so many young players. Listen, Max Brown played. You've got Andy Jean got in. Aiden Mizell got the ball, got his hands on it. Jordan Castell continues playing well. He was the highest graded player on defense. So you got a bunch of young players in. I keep saying I think the best players on this team are the guys that either came in with the transfer portal or the guys from the last two recruiting classes. So you're going to be young. You're going to take some lumps. And then the other thing, too, is nobody on Florida's roster or any of the coaches scheduled McNeese. So, yeah, you played a bad opponent, but you beat the teams you're supposed to beat the way you're supposed to beat them. And that's what Florida did with McNeese. And now, none of them scheduled Tennessee either, Keith, but you got to play them this week. And I think it's going to be a really, really cool environment Saturday at 7:00 in the Swamp.
It actually wasn't a terrible environment last night in the Swamp for considering who Florida was playing, Nick. Let's take a look back at some of the statistics from last night. And a lot of them look good, but then there's a couple that make you think, well, wait a second. Let's pump the brakes a little bit, but Florida 33 first downs, McNeese 6. That's about what you expect, although 33 is a lot. But that tells you a couple stories. It tells you that Florida didn't have a ton of chunk plays. They just kind of went down the field again and again and again. Touchdown drives on each of Florida's first 7 drives. That's big. So 560 total yards for McNeese. Nick, only 112 yards. Florida had 327 rushing yards, 51 on the ground. 327 yards rushing on 51 carries. But now I'm looking back here, and I went through the numbers a little more closely today. So you had Montrell Johnson with 119 carries and
119 yards, not carries.
Yeah,
That'd be
119 yards. So I'm getting text messages here. Montrell Johnson, 119.
Put him inside an ice block. Not even an ice.
I get distracted so easy. Montrell Johnson, 119 yards on 15 carries. Trevor Etienne, 84 yards on 11 carries. Trayon Webb, 71 yards on 14 carries. Now, again, 327 yards rushing is a lot, Nick. But did you know that Florida's longest rush was only 22 yards during that game? Mm-hmm. So they still need some bigger, longer home run hitting type plays, especially when you get into the SEC.
Right. And I don't know that I'm super worried about that. It is certainly something you look at and you're thinking, well, you should be able to. You're bigger, faster, stronger, more athletic. You should have more chunk plays. But I'm not too concerned with it. I think just getting the running game back going is enough for me. And I've been screaming, at some of these play calls and just screaming like, run the dang ball, like I'm Sandra Bullock in The Blind Side. controversial movie right now, considering it's going to trial. But I think that's Florida's strength. And when I look at it and I look and see how well Florida ran the ball, yes, they should run the ball like that against a team like McNeese. It's not a huge concern for me. Certainly, you're going to need those chunk plays. You're not going to be a team that, when I look at like the drive chart, you're probably not going to be a team that can sustain having to go 10 plays 70 yards, 9 plays 75 yards, 12 plays 80 yards. I think you're going to need some big plays, but not a huge concern for me. I think Florida did exactly what I needed them, or exactly what I needed to see from them last night.
All right, Nick, I watched the game from home. I didn't make it up to Gainesville yesterday. You were there. So on TV, you only see the ball and you only see the line of scrimmage, and they throw the pass deep, and then you finally see the defense. You don't get to see what the defensive coverages are and things like that. What was McNeese? We had somebody mention this last night. Were they dropping a lot of guys? Was that one of the things that maybe prevented longer runs? They weren't all stacked at the line of scrimmage. Did you notice anything?
No, I didn't notice anything
Okay.
too crazy. I thought Florida did a good job getting a hat on a hat. McNeese tackled well. For the most part, it was just one of those things where I don't think Florida's trying to do anything crazy. You just need to go out there and play football against a team like that. So to me, I don't think Florida missed anything really. But also you don't need to be taking shots. I think after the game you had against Utah where you could not run the ball, I think you needed to make it a point of emphasis. Listen, we should be able to line up 11 on 11 and just run power inside all game. And if we do that, we should be able to win this game and score 40 points. So I don't think you needed to be exotic or try any, flea flickers or anything like that. The only thing I do wonder is I haven't seen Florida's receivers in a couple of years, even with the past coaching staff, which goes back into when Billy Gonzalez was the receiver coach under Dan Mullen. I don't know that they get great separation. And that might be a better answer to your question. I don't know that they get great separation or that they have in a while. And other than the freshmen, these are all receivers who I would have said it about in the 2021 season and the 2022 season, not being able to get separation. So as you get into SEC play, that's probably a concern that we need to talk about, and we would creep up a little bit more.
All right. As Nick always has to remind me, please, everybody, if you enjoy the show, hit the like button, subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're putting out tons of content each week, and also leave a comment. We appreciate it all. We appreciate everybody stopping by. We do have a little bit of bad news, though, not Gators team related, but our guest tonight, Teddy Foster. Well, he was going to come, and now he can't come. He's got dinner with grandma. He can't cancel that. So Teddy Foster, a defensive back commit, is not going to be able to make it on the show tonight. But I'll give you a little bit of scouting report on what I saw watching him Friday night with Corey Raymond, Florida secondary coach, standing almost right next to me. Next week's show, we already have an early commitment from Florida offensive tackle commit Fletcher Westfall. So we got a lot of good programming coming out this week. Now, Nick, one of the rising stars this season for Florida is Eugene Wilson, all right, the freshman receiver. So I'm going to ask you something. Yesterday, he had one carry. I think it was an end around for 18 yards, and he caught 4 passes for 36 yards. And he looks like he has just amazing skill set and unlimited potential here for the Gators. A lot of Florida fans wanted to see him get the ball more yesterday, but I understand why Florida didn't. You don't want to put too much out there for your bigger opponents coming. What do you think? Was it the right mix? 5 touches? Should they have made an effort to get him the ball more in different situations, different circumstances, just to make sure he's comfortable on the big stage, which, by the way, he looked comfortable on the big stage in Salt Lake City. So that doesn't appear to be an issue, but he's still a young guy. 5 touches. You think that's about the right amount, or would you like to see less or more?
No, not the right amount. He did play 43 plays, but to me, I said last night, on our post game show, I'm not going to put the Percy Harvin. I'm not going to do the Urban Meyer, Keith, and say he's the next Percy Harvin. Every year when I'm trying to recruit some 5-star, but he is a player that has a Kadarius Toney excitement where when you get the ball in his hands, you feel like it could go for 6 at any time.
Well, Nick, you tried to, and let me interrupt you for a second. You've tried to come up with a nickname. I can tell it's floating around in your head. The guy talking to me right now, Nick Delatorre, came up with the nickname Jack Tony for Jack Caglione. Jack Connie, excuse me, the great Gator baseball player. And I know you said last night maybe he's Percy Harvin Light. Speaking of Eugene Wilson, so I could sense that a true nickname is coming from you soon. But you like what you see, so you wanted him to get the ball more. You even against McNeese, you don't care about giving away everything to Tennessee or what? You're not worried about that?
I don't care if he's playing McGrandma State. You give him the ball. He's exciting. Even after the Utah game where he had some mental lapses, mental mistakes on special teams, I thought, leave him back there. Figure out your number situation. Leave him back there. This kid's exciting. He's going to, if you're talking about those chunk plays that you want, anytime, I think you could line him up as a running back in the pistol. I remember looking at a play when Percy Harvin, I think it was against maybe LSU or South Carolina, they just ran a counter with Percy as a running back. And he took it for 60 yards for a touchdown, 40 yards for a touchdown. Eugene Wilson, I called him, I think yesterday, like a middle-class Percy Harvin. He's not a poor man's Percy Harvin. That's, down on him. I think he's a middle-class.
I'd say upper middle class, maybe upper middle class.
Listen, he's driving a nice car. He's living in the suburbs, Keith, has a good job, an upper middle-class Percy Harvin. He's a really fun player. And it's a credit to him. He's only been on campus for like 2 months. So showed up ready to work and got in there. So, yeah, 5 touches. No, I don't think that's enough. And I think I want to see more. I think he's a player that you could have left in and featured the ball more. When back when you were a veteran reporter during the Spurrier years, Spurrier would put in the 5th stringers and still throw the ball 40 yards down the field. And it's like, well, we're just running our offense. I would have liked to see you continue to run your offense, even when Max Brown's in there. Hey, Max, throw a little outlet pass, throw a little screen to Eugene Wilson. Give me an end around with Eugene Wilson, even if you're up late. For me, for my money, if you're going to start beating teams like Tennessee, LSU, South Carolina, you're going to need those big chunk plays. You're going to need your best players to get the ball. And I think Eugene Wilson's already one of your best players.
I think one of the problems nowadays is that you got these running clocks. The clock seems to never stop now. New clock rules every few years to speed up the game. Nick, I've never needed them to speed up the game. When I'm at a Gator game, I'm in heaven, right? I don't want the game to end. That means I got to get back to my life. You know what I mean? And so Florida only ran 69 offensive plays yesterday. So 560 yards is a lot, but only 69 offensive plays. There's only so many touches to go around. It's interesting. A few more stats here, and we're going to go. We're going to get into the Tennessee matchup in a little bit here and what we can tell you about that. But in this game, Graham Mertz. This was the Graham Mertz I think we expected to see. Establish the running game. And him more as the game manager type. And I think people, Nick, think that's a negative connotation. It's not. Him throwing 44 times in week 1 told me all I needed to know. If you told me after the game, hey, Florida threw 44 times, I would have said, well, they probably lost by a couple of touchdowns. And that's exactly what happened. So 14-17 yesterday. I thought he threw the ball exceptionally well. I think 2 of the incompletions, one of them was just a flat out drop. And another one you could argue should have been caught. So he easily could have been 16-17, 193 yards, 1 touchdown, QBR 61.9, which is pretty good. He had a 50-yard completion in the third quarter to Ricky Pearsall. Pearsall finished with 6 catches for 123 yards. Florida's averaging 12.9 yards or averaged 12.9 yards a catch yesterday. What we saw was him checking down a lot again yesterday and taking what the defense gave him. But also, I don't think they were running this extraordinarily diverse offense yesterday. In other words, what we saw, really the only thing that I saw, Nick, and you may disagree with me, you probably watched the game a little closer than I did, that I think was the end around to Eugene Wilson. I actually thought, what are they doing? Why would you do that? But it's probably to set up something down the road. It may not be next week either. It may be something in 8 weeks where the same formation, everything's run the same and something comes out of that. But kept it pretty simplified. I thought he checked down and listen, that's a value. If you can hit the check down guy out in the flat and get 3, 4, 5, 6 yards, That's a win, man. That is an absolute win. Offensive line was blocking against a team that, let's be honest, they didn't have the guns to get in there, but they held their own. And speaking of Eugene Wilson, I was on the phone today with a guy named Larry Kennedy, the Florida great defensive back. Nick, he's going to be on the show this week. Huge game against Tennessee in 1991. Florida was leading late. It was kind of dicey, though. Still could have gone either way, and he had a long pick six. Top 5 loudest moments in Florida field history, a lot of people say. I would have to agree. And Larry Kennedy said, hey, Eugene Wilson, that guy's special. That guy is special. So former players, he even has their attention. But when you look at the stats, Nick, was there anything? I mean, nothing really. It was about what we thought they'd do, really. They established the run. Anything jump off the page to you? I mean, maybe the defensive numbers that you only held McNeese to 112 yards, even in a game like that, even against an inferior opponent. Nick, 112 yards is 112 yards and 6 first downs. I mean, I thought they were outstanding. After the first couple of plays, McNeese kind of went right into Florida territory to start the game. Big third down by sack by Scooby Williams, and from there they were flat out dominant. They seem to be trending up, don't they?
Yeah, I don't know that you take any really one thing away from McNeese and hang your hat on. It's McNeese. Like I said, though, you have to beat the teams you're supposed to beat the way you're supposed to beat them. When I look at Florida's defense, though, I think only a handful of missed tackles through 2 games. And I've said it a bunch, but you don't tackle in the offseason anymore. Back when my dad was playing football, it was 3 a days, and they were giving you like salt tablets at practice when it's 95 degrees in South Florida, and you're going through Oklahoma drills. Now you don't tackle, and all across the country, you see teams with great defenses still take 1, 2, 3, 2.5 games to get back into the feeling of what it's like to tackle live. So to me, it's a really big deal to see Florida, who I think would average close to like 9 missed tackles a game last year. I think it's a big deal to see them tackling well and making tackles in space, especially early. That's going to be a big thing. I mean, last year, I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, but they had to have had 15, 16 missed tackles against Florida State, and maybe 12 of those on Jordan Travis alone. So that's a big deal for me to see Austin Armstrong come in and he talked to us a lot about, and I was skeptical about it. I said, listen, it sounds great, but let me see it. And he said they break down the tackle into every different facet, whether it's recognizing who you're supposed to tackle, what's the angle I'm supposed to get to, am I the guy that's supposed to make the tackle, or am I the guy that's just supposed to turn him back inside for somebody else to make the tackle? So they really break it down into so many different small things that Florida can work on because you're not actually tackling. And I think we're seeing that right now. Last year, Florida looked like the little giants, at the beginning of the movie trying to tackle. And this year, they look like a football team who swarms to the football and is sound tackling. I think that's something that's important once you get into these bigger games. So the biggest thing for me, takeaway, I don't think there's any one thing other than you get confidence back. You can feel good about yourself again. And then on defense, more than anything, schematically, Austin Armstrong's doing, you get to the quarterback a little bit. I would like to see them get to the quarterback a little bit more, probably. But tackling is just a big one for me. It's one of the keys that I talked to you about, Keith, in the offseason, just saying, listen, I need to see Florida tackle the ball carrier.
I'd say here's John Wilcox chiming in that McNeese played 3 high safeties to keep everything in front of them. That's what somebody pointed out to me last night. Again, I couldn't see that on TV, unfortunately. And really to see if Florida could sustain drives and not give up the big play. So keeping everything in front of them. So Florida took what they gave them. Even against a team like McNeese, you can only taketh what they giveth. Okay. That's just the way it goes. You can try to throw deep. You try all these things. But really you wanted to play conservatively, reestablish your mentality as a running team, play conservatively as not to give too much to Tennessee to go on. And John points out it was ideal for a Florida team that has an O-line, offensive line needing reps and confidence. Lindell Hudson got a lot of reps last night. I want to say, Nick, what's the situation on the offensive line? Who do you project as the 5 starters this coming week against Tennessee?
Yeah, I think the only real change they would make in the starting 5 would be Jake Slaughter and Kingsley Iguakin. If Iguakin's healthy and ready, he's in. And with the high ankle sprain, the only thing you can really do is give it time. He did it the week about 10 days before the season. So now we're looking at getting into the 5th full week by the time we get to Tennessee, which is right in that time frame, as long as there's no setbacks. I know Billy says if you don't practice on Tuesday or Wednesday for us, we typically don't play you. Depends on the player. I'll say that. There were plenty of guys last year that didn't practice on Tuesday or Wednesday and just did walk through on Friday that played in the game. And I think Kingsley would fall into that category. Jake Slaughter hasn't played poorly. He's been fine. He's been a good replacement, but you're not replacing 40 games played, 26 consecutive starts before missing the first 2 in this year. I do really like Najee Harris, and I think Florida needs to continue getting these guys in. Lindell Hudson, Florida has long said that he's their 3rd offensive tackle. Damian George was fine last night against McNeese State. I think if anyone had a bad game, you would have noticed it, Keith, because you're looking at them like, hey, what are you doing here? This is easier than a practice, or should be easier than a practice. So Lindell Hudson, I think, looked good. They got a bunch of snaps. Was in there on a ton of series. So Florida probably feels better about him now that they've gotten him live and seen him live against somebody else. But the only real wholesale change I would anticipate seeing is Kingsley walking back at center.
Okay. We're going to get to a couple comments here. Then we'll start talking a little bit about the Tennessee-Florida rivalry and into the game a little bit. We got about 25 more minutes. Again, I'm Keith Niebuhr of Gators Online. That's Nick Delatorre. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and please leave a comment. We're going to do this every week. We love doing it. We got post-game shows. We got content throughout the week. Zach Albaverdi, our other beat writer, joins Nick every week for an unbelievable midweek show. But Q Lee says, hey, special teams still trash, and the D-line is bigger but not faster. Only 2 sacks against this weak team is bad. Now, special teams, obviously, Nick, again, another miscue last night, the missed PAT, those things can hurt you in those big games. Yeah. The 2 sacks on the defense, I will defend. McNeese only attempted 14 passes last night, okay? So, and the QB was pressured some other times. So, again, 2 sacks, 14 plus 2, so 16 chances, sort of. You know what I mean? I mean, it's not like they didn't get pressure on the guy, But anyway, just thoughts on special teams, Nick. I mean, here we are again, week 2. You had all the blunders week 1. There weren't as many this time, but you still, wasn't great.
Let me get a round of applause for just having 11 different numbers on the field for every time the special teams went out. Keith, we're taking baby steps here. Listen, you can't get on the special teams coach for a shanked punt or a missed kick. That stuff's going to happen. And if it continues happening, then you've got to go to somewhere else on the depth chart. If Adam Mahalik can't convert from 35 and in, you need to give Trey Smack a shot. And I don't care what they did over the spring and the summer. You don't count wins and losses in the spring and the summer. You do in the fall. And if you're not converting them in the fall, then you need to figure something else out. I just don't view Florida's special teams as a weapon at all. And for a head coach in Billy Napier that calls the group an entirely different thing, calls them game changers, I think we initially got the thought process that, he calls them game changers. This is going to be like Urban Meyer. He's going to put his best guys on special teams. They're going to eat first. They're going to eat steak and lobster. You're going to want to be on special teams, and that's going to make them great. And they just don't look well coached on special teams. There's never a threat when a team is punting or kicking. You're never on the edge of your seat thinking, Florida's going to go get this. When they field a kick or a punt, I'd be fine going and getting a drink. If I'm at the house, that Florida's punting the ball, or Florida's the defense forced to punt. Let's go refill my drink, because nothing's going to happen. Nothing good's going to happen, at least. So to me, I don't know what you can do in season, but Florida doesn't have an emphasis on their special teams.
Yeah. Well, look, I grew up in Gainesville. I've been going to games for years. And when you look back historically, Nick, at the Gator teams that were very, very good, they generally had pretty strong special teams. Again, in the 90s, you had the great kicker Judd Davis. I think he might have won the Lou Groza Award. I believe he did. There were years where you didn't have great punters, but then there were years where you had Shane Edge, who was probably the best punter in the SEC. In the 80s, you had a field goal kick.
His son played baseball at Florida, Keith.
There you go. In the 1980s, you had Chris Perkins and Ray Criswell and John David Francis, great punters, great kickers. Chris Perkins made a 60-yarder against Tulane. And then you go back to the 70s, and you had Florida trying to tie Georgia in a game, Nick, and the field goal got kicked into the center's butt. I mean, and so that kept you from winning an SEC title. So there's a direct correlation in Florida Gators football history with poor special teams and seasons that didn't quite meet expectations. And again, you go back to the 80s, Ricky Nattiel returning kicks for punts for touchdowns. You had the Urban Meyer, Brandon James, the great punt return. So again, direct correlation. And you're right. There doesn't seem to be anybody that, if you're the other team, let's put it this way. If you're the other team playing Florida, are you scared about a guy breaking a punt return? Are you scared about a kickoff return getting past the 30? I wouldn't think so. I wouldn't think so. And that's not, again, that's not all coaching. That's also indicative the state of the roster, if we're going to be totally frank.
Yeah.
I mean, Nick, one of the, okay, where you finish your thought.
It's not like they don't emphasize it enough. Like Florida does 3, full special teams periods in practice. And that's about what you're going to see, Keith. I'm sure if you were at like an Auburn practice back when you were covering them, you probably get 3. Well, maybe it's not a great example of the way Auburn played when you were covering them, but you're going to get generally like three periods. You're not going to do less offensive reps in practice. Let the offense play less 11 on 11. Well, shoot, we had some bad punts. We should probably do 5 punting units on Tuesday this week before the Tennessee game. Like, that's not going to happen. Like, you have to trust that your punters and your kickers and your long snappers are getting their work in before practice, but you also need to have some creativity and be coached well in the other facets of the game. Like I said, you're going to have some shank punts. You're going to have missed kicks. That stuff's going to happen. Even Evan McPherson, who's in the NFL and kicked in a Super Bowl, missed kicks at Florida. So that stuff's going to happen, but where are the athletes and where the scheme and maybe it goes to the head coach and not on Chris Couch, the game changer specialist coordinator. But when are you dialing up pressure? When are you trying to go get a punt? When are you trying to send Jason Marshall out there, which I think when he's returning punts is essentially just to wave his arm and catch the ball. Send 10 guys, go and try to block a punt and create some momentum. For the most part on punt, you're fair catching it anyway. And if you're playing, max punt protect and still fair catching it, well, screw that. Bring 10 if you're not taking the punts anyway.
It's wild. It's funny. You mentioned that you only have so many periods in a practice to work on these things. And I think that was the biggest thing when I started being able to go to open practice windows back at Auburn. I couldn't believe how fast everything went. The periods just went by like this. And I kept thinking, how do you really master a play? Because I came from the old school where I remember going to a basketball practice. Well, Bobby Hurley, the great Bobby Hurley, his brother's Danny Hurley, I guess the UConn coach now. I went to watch their dad coach a practice, head basketball coach at #1 team in the country in high school basketball, Jersey City, St. Anthony. Nick, they worked on the same play for 90 minutes because one kid couldn't get it right. One kid couldn't get it right again, just like that Kurt Russell hockey movie, Miracle, again. And that's what they did until they got it right. And by the way, the kid that couldn't get anything right ended up a full ride scholarship to University of Minnesota at an era when they were really good in basketball. And then you go to these football practices and it's one period after the other. It's crazy. Here's the thing though, Nick, when a coach gets fired, I think a lot of times fans want to believe, not just fans, look, we're fans. We're guilty of. You want to believe that it was the coach's fault entirely. It was the play calling. We didn't throw to the tight end enough. We didn't do this. We didn't do that. Reality is it's largely when a guy gets fired, it's because they didn't have the dudes. Now, you could argue Ron Zook was a different situation, right? But generally speaking, Dan Mullen didn't have the dudes anymore. And that was his fault, but he didn't have the dudes anymore.
I was going to say that's the issue.
Yeah.
You go to the Bill Parcells. I think he said this when he was in the NFL. He's like, if you want me to cook the dinner, if you want me to coach, let me shop for the groceries. He wanted to be the coach and the GM. Well, in college, you are You control the wine lists, you control reservations, you control who sets the table, what goes on the table, you control everything. So, Ron Zook just wasn't a good Saturday coach, but Monday through Friday, he could recruit and get some guys. And Urban Meyer was the beneficiary of that. Jim McElwain took him some time to get things going. Yeah. But Dan Mullen won with Jim McElwain players his first 2 years. When he had to start playing with the guys that he recruited, things fell apart quickly.
I just don't know, looking at that roster, which, by the way, much better than me, and same with Zach Albaverdi, our coworker. I just don't, other than Eugene Wilson and a couple other guys, I don't see too many game changers. I just don't. We'll see. Maybe they're going to prove us wrong. Obviously, you'll have special punt block type plays for the Tennessee week, tendencies you've noticed over the last couple of years following Josh Heupel's teams and all that stuff. But all right, let's get to some comments here.
But who's the Brandon James? James terrorized the entire city of Knoxville for 4 years when he was in Gainesville. Yeah, terrorized them. They might wake up in a cold sweat this week, Keith, in Knoxville, having nightmares of Brandon James returning another punt or another kick.
I'm with you.
Nobody strikes that fear on Florida's roster right now.
Smokey Gator says Shane Edge, the former Gators punter, would jack you up. Now, I don't know if you ever met him, Nick, but Shane Edge was like 5'11" and could dunk behind his back. I mean, probably the best athlete to ever play punter in Florida history.
Well, punters are people too. And
here you go. Gator Nation does not seem like a fan of Billy. We will just move on that one. Joseph says he liked Lindell Hudson, the FIU Florida International transfer at right tackle, and Damian George moving to the left side.
Quick note on that. I think I would like to see Damian George at guard. And before Keontae Goodwin had to leave to deal with his mother's situation, Damian George was working at right guard next to Keontae Goodwin. And I thought, okay, that looks good. Those two guys look really good next to each other, and they're huge. Rob Sale and Darnell Stapleton have forgotten more about offensive line than I'll ever, hope to know. But I look at Damian George and kind of his feet, and I think that looks like an interior offensive line.
Well, Nick, it's Florida Tennessee week. Remember these two guys behind me?
Yeah.
The heyday of the rivalry, a rivalry that really wasn't a rivalry until 1990, early 90s.
Well, you asked this question on our message board, Keith. Let's ask the guys in the comments, what is your rivalry list? And I think for me, I was born in 1988. Florida just kind of handled Georgia. Like Spurrier didn't mess around with Georgia, would just beat them. And like Georgia, now you look at them and the way the kind of series has flipped, a lot of younger fans might think Georgia's the number one rival. But for me, growing up, that September, typically the third Saturday in September, Florida, Tennessee, Spurrier, Fulmer, whoever won that game was probably going to win the SEC East and probably going to be in national championship contention. So for me, Tennessee, at least growing up, that was a bigger rivalry for Florida than LSU, Auburn, Georgia, for me. And then obviously being from South Florida, you're surrounded by Florida State fans. So for me, Florida State and Tennessee were the Gators' biggest rivals growing up. But sound off in the comments. Who is your perceived biggest rival or your biggest rival?
And we're going to be talking more about this game throughout the week, and you guys are really going to break it down. We'll just kind of touch on some things. But the rivalry itself, Florida leads 31-21. Tennessee's not behind in many rivalries, Nick, but that's because they're longtime rivals. They played in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s when Tennessee was dominant over everybody.
With General Neyland,
General Neyland and his 7 maxims, which we're going to bring back this week. If you take his 7 maxims and you apply it to Florida games, it kind of lines up. He said you had to do these 7 things to win, and it's really fascinating. But you go back to 1928, Nick. I'll never forget that 1928 team. It was a gritty group of kids, and No, I was not. But Florida was unbeaten going into the last game of the year. Unbeaten, starting to get some national recognition. Hadn't played Tennessee much. All right. If they win in Knoxville, they go to the Rose Bowl. That's what the word was. They were going to the Rose Bowl. They'd have a chance to maybe be a national champion. At that point, the SEC, Nick, didn't get a lot of respect. It was Harvard, Yale, military schools, USC and UCLA. That they didn't have teams at that point. So and Florida lost 13-12 on a very wet field. And they always basically said that it was wet on purpose. They had a really fast team, and they think that Tennessee made sure that field was wet to slow them down.
Grow the grass. Don't mow it for a couple of weeks.
Now let's flash forward to the 1960s. I'm gonna be real quick with everybody. I promise. I'm giving Nick a chance to text all his friends here. 1960s, Tennessee's kind of on top of the SEC. It's them and Bama every year. And lo and behold, their coach was a former Florida player, former Florida defensive back turned quarterback, Doug Dickey. Well, after the 1969 season, which, by the way, Florida beat Tennessee in the Gator Bowl, after that season, Ray Graves stepped down as coach of the Florida Gators, and Doug Dickey left Tennessee to go to Florida, and he coached Florida for 9 seasons. Came close, but never could quite get over the hump, and then ended up going back to Tennessee, Nick, as the AD. Florida played Tennessee twice in the 80s. Florida beat them both times in 84 and 85. Both those seasons, Florida finished first in the SEC. Won the SEC title in 84, later had it taken away. 85, they were ineligible for the title, but they beat Tennessee. But the rivalry really took off 90, 91, 92, 93. Now, 90 Tennessee Spurs first season, Tennessee beat the living daylights out of Florida 45-3 up in Knoxville. The next year, Florida won 35-18 in Gainesville. 1992, I believe, was the first year of the division breakup, Nick. And Florida and Tennessee, at that point, were going to start playing every year. And all through the 90s and 2000s, it just became one of these great college football rivalries. Florida did at one point win several games in a row. I think Florida has the longest winning streak in the series, 11 games in a row, 11 wins in a row from 2005 to 2015. Ironically, after Steve Spurrier left, Spurrier was 8-3 against the Vols. Tennessee currently has a 1-game winning streak, but really a fun game that kind of sets the tone for the rest of the season. It's rare to lose this game and then turn around and win the East. It happened in 90. It happened in 92. Tennessee kind of melted late. Georgia melted, and Florida was able to kind of slide into that SEC championship game, but it doesn't happen very often, Nick. It's a hell of a rivalry. What do we know about this Tennessee team just on the surface? What can you tell us? I mean, a dominant win over Virginia, we know, in week 1. I think that score was, I've got it right here, 49-13. And then just this past weekend, not that pretty over Austin Peay, 30-13. Now, here's interesting thing, though. Virginia was held to 201 yards. That's not much. Austin Peay was held to 339, but only 79 on the ground. So Tennessee has not yet given up 100 yards rushing in its first 2 games. And obviously, Nick, Florida's got to run the ball. Any series proves that. It's been historically this one. The team that runs effectively generally wins. What can you tell us about this thing going into this game?
Yeah, obviously you've got the Formula One race style offense from Josh Heupel. That's not going to change. I think it's an easy system for quarterbacks, and I think he makes quarterbacks look better than what they are, maybe even. I'm very on record not being a big Joe Milton fan. He has a chance this week to make me eat those words, but I've been saying all off season. I saw him at Friday Night Lights when he was a junior in high school. I saw him go to Michigan. I saw him be bad at Tennessee too, and I saw him go 2 for 8 the last time he was in Gainesville when Tennessee lost to Florida. So I know the offense is exciting. They're fun to watch. They go. Florida has rotated a ton of defensive players in and out early on this season. You can only change personnel when they do. And they're conditioned well enough, especially their big offensive linemen, to just go and not have to switch guys out and not to switch personnel. So that's something to watch. Do Florida's defenders get tired? They're not going for long extended periods and having to go quickly or as quickly as Tennessee will make you go. And then defense, Tennessee was bad defensively last year. They got some guys in through the portal, through recruiting. They developed some younger guys. They're deep on defense. That's something that stuck out to me against Virginia, who apparently is terrible. They lost again this week to, I think, James Madison. I was told, I think by you, Keith, not a bad football program with James Madison.
One of the better presidents, apparently, also. So,
is he on any money?
I'd have to have money to know the answer to that. I don't think so. I think people get him confused with Hamilton, quite frankly.
Gotcha. So to me, that'll be another thing. How does Tennessee, that you said, stack up against the run? We've seen Florida, two different formulas. One is Graham Mertz throws the ball 44 times, and the other one is line up, hat on a hat, challenge your offensive lineman, like Rob Sale going old school, grabbing face masks and saying, move the guy in front of you, line up, hat on a hat, and just try to run the ball. I think you need a mixture of that. I don't think you need to run the ball 65 times against Tennessee to 10 passes. But Graham Mertz throwing the ball 44 times isn't the formula to get you a winning equation. So I think Florida Tennessee is going to be a good matchup. Tennessee is a much better team defensively than they were the last time Florida saw them.
Nick, I'm going to go over just a couple quick stats. We're going to go for about 5 or 6 more minutes here. Again, I'm Keith Niebuhr, and that's Nick Delatorre. Joe Milton, by the way, an Orlando native. He's 42 of 63 for 429 yards, 4 touchdowns, and no interceptions. He's thrown a lot of short passes so far. They've been very conservative. Obviously, the luxury of their schedule was they didn't have to play an all-out game like Florida did in week 1 at Utah. But he's only averaging, I guess, 6.8 yards a completion. Long play, only 43 yards. That's the longest passing play of the year so far against. We were talking about Florida, Nick, a long run of only 22 yards against McNeese. I keep wanting to call McNeese State because they were that for so many years. But Tennessee's long pass against 2 mediocre teams is only 38 yards. Now, on the ground, Tennessee has rushed for 515 yards on 84 carries, 6.1 yards a carry. Jalen Wright is off to a great start, 25 carries, 233 yards, 9.3 yard average. Jabari Small, 162 yards on 6.2 yards a carry. Their long run this season's only 38 yards. So they don't have they haven't hit any home runs yet either. So either maybe something's missing, we don't know, or they just have kind of kept things close to the vest, which is probably what's happened so far. But look, they're going to be ready to play. Florida's going to be ready to play. Tennessee, that season last year, had to have just changed. But the season they had last year, Nick, is the season Florida needs this year. Get that psyche right. I think there's a belief now in Knoxville that they can compete with about anybody after having beaten Alabama last year. Now, you still got to go out and do it week to week. And I think sometimes you forget how to win. And it seemed like for years, Tennessee just couldn't figure out how to beat the good teams, even games that were close. I think, didn't Alabama beat them on Tay Cody's blocked field goal? I mean, it was like they just kept beating. They couldn't get over that hump. And it feels like that's sort of what Florida has reverted back to. The roles have reversed a little bit. But, Nick, if you're a Florida fan, what would give you some confidence going into this game?
For me, well, one, and I don't know that this plays any factor into it other than what you just mentioned about learning how to win, not knowing how to win. Florida hasn't lost in Gainesville to Tennessee since 2003. Tennessee won in 03 and 04. Florida has, and that's 2 of their only 4 wins in the last 20 years. Florida is 16-4 versus Tennessee in the last 20 years. And exactly what you just said. I mean, I'm thinking back to the McElwain days and Will Greer hits Antonio Callaway. And I think the play call Jim McElwain told us was, it was called Train Right Jill, Big Ben in. And Brandon Powell sets this beautiful block for Antonio Callaway. They go down and Florida takes a lead late. Felipe Franks hitting Tyree Cleveland late. And you get the pictures that look like the Tennessee coaches have just fainted, face planted on the grass. Like Tennessee, like to what you just said, has just found different and creative ways to lose to Florida over the last 2 decades. You obviously didn't have that last year. Florida kept it close, but Tennessee got a win. I think for Billy Napier, and I wrote this in my 5 thoughts after the game. It's only Billy's 17th game coming up, or 15th game coming up. Excuse me. I don't know that you can say it's a must win, but when I look at Florida's schedule and you don't have a win over a rival, you went 0 for last year. And I look at the schedule, I think this is the easiest rivalry game for you to get a win in. And I look at it and I go, this kind of feels like a must win, and not a must win in the sense of like jobs are on the line, but a must win in the sense of you got some goodwill back with your fan base. You had a really good home field environment. If you beat Tennessee, you get a signature win, an early 10-year signature win for Billy Napier, you get the fan base thinking, okay, we might still take lumps this year because we're young. But we got a win that we can hang our hat on right now. And then you go in, you're going to beat Charlotte, and you'll go into Lexington, 3-1. If you lose to Tennessee, you're going to go into Lexington 500, potentially lose to the Wildcats for the third year in a row. That hasn't happened since Lord knows how long. I have to look that up before we head up to Lexington. So I think in terms of your thought process, the fan base's thought process on Billy as a head coach, on Billy as a program builder, on where the program is right now, Saturday kind of feels like a must win for me in that kind of category. And again, I stress, like, no one's getting fired if Florida loses to Tennessee. This is more about proof of concept. Like, hey, you've been building. We've allowed you to build for a little while. We need to start seeing at least some prototypes. We understand you had to lay the foundation and build the walls. We would like to see a model home. We understand we're not going to move in tomorrow, but can we see what it's going to look like at least?
I'm with you, Nick. I think one of the things is, I was looking at those first 5 games of Florida, and I thought they could come out of that 3-2. Right? They could come out of that 3-2. Then a winning season's possible because, then after that, you have Vanderbilt and South Carolina. Well, Vanderbilt's going to be at home. They haven't looked great so far. South Carolina really hasn't looked great. And but here's the thing. After week 1, you almost were like, okay, well, Tennessee's going to be – you're almost starting to write Florida off in that game. And you're almost starting to write them off in Lexington. Well, Tennessee, you can't really tell much from what they've done in 2 weeks. They haven't played anybody, so we don't know. Feels a lot more like a 50-50 type game than it did a week ago. And Kentucky just struggled with Eastern Kentucky. As you know, they're breaking in their new quarterback in Lexington. So all of a sudden you're thinking, you don't want to think too far ahead, but all of a sudden there are possibilities that maybe, just maybe, if you win this game, you could be 4-1 coming out of those first 5 with Vanderbilt coming to Florida Field. And when you're 4-1, you know what? Sometimes you play like you're 4-1. Sometimes you play above what you really are. And the flip side of that is sometimes you play below what you really are. But what you didn't want was for Florida to come out of this 5-game start 2-3. Because once the genie's out of the bottle with the fans, once they start losing faith in a coaching staff and a team, it's hard to get it back. And I learned from covering that SEC West school for a lot of years. Once a coach gets on that hot seat, whether it's a real one or a perceived one, it's hard to get off of. It's hard to get off of it. And I think fans, they're rightfully impatient. I think Billy mentioned this last week in the press conferences with you guys, Nick. And now you've got FSU off to this start. You don't like to compare other schools to yours, but we're in a comparison business. I mean, Nick, what you and I do is compared to our competitors, right? And now Miami just got their big, even though Texas A&M won 5 games last year, their signature win, right? And so they feel like they're headed in the right direction. We'll see. It's a long season. But I think Florida fans are like, okay, when is my moment coming? Yeah. When is my program's turning point coming? This is a chance. This is a chance. Nick, we're going to get your picks later in the week. That will do it for this edition of Gators Online Live. We appreciate everybody stopping by. I'm Keith Niebuhr. That's Nick Delatorre. Going to have great programming all week. Like I said, former Gator, one of the all-time great DBs at Florida. Larry Kennedy's going to join us. A huge moment in the 1991 Tennessee game. Make sure, again, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Feel free to leave comments even after the show. Let Nick know how terrible he looks and how great I look, whatever you're thinking, whatever comes to mind. Make sure you go to GatorsOnline.com. We've got great promotions right now. $1 gets you in for 1 month. Once we get you in, man, it's going to be hard to leave, man. I'm telling you, there's so much good content, so much intel, but we really want to thank everybody for stopping by. It's because of you all that we get to do this. Nick, you have a good week, brother. I know you're going to be busy. I'll see you soon, and take care, Gator Nation.